Welcome to Spirit Knocks, or Brooklyn Mosaic. So today we're going to continue with our talk about graffiti. And this one, though, we're going to talk about the common themes. I mentioned in the last video we were going to hit this topic, and we're going to do this. So I hope y'all ready. I have my notes, so I will be referring to my notes. But some of the common themes that kept coming up when I was talking about how graffiti artists were injured, how they lost their lives, I thought it was really important, just like when you have dreams, right, to really look at the scenario of how these incidents were happening, how these artists were dying, how they were being injured. What were some of the common themes that we heard over and over again as I read how they had these accidents, right? One of the common things we heard was art, right? They're there because they all are trying to use their art. Why is that a big deal? If we look at art in a spiritual way, we look at art as an expression, right? An individual's expression, that they have something that they have to get out of them, they need to express, and they need the world to see it. Because they could simply write in a sketchbook, but they weren't doing that. They were writing on walls. They were writing on places where populations would be witness to what they were doing, and it would last forever, right? At least that was the thought pattern, right? So I think it's important to consider that art has a spiritual context in these scenarios. In addition to, can't mention art without mentioning creativity and chakras being in alignment, right? Because we know that art comes from your sacral chakra, right? That's where things are birthed. That's where things are created. So it's important to mention that. If you think of anything else, please feel free to put it in the chat. The other thing that was a common theme was that graffiti is code, right? The letters and the numbers, sometimes you could read it and sometimes you couldn't. Sometimes it was just beautiful and you really didn't even understand that there was a message there. But a lot of times they would talk about things that were happening in politics. They would talk about how their governments were trying to silence them, right? It was freedom of speech. So all of that was code, right? I want you to consider that. The code that they were relaying to us also is relayed to us, as you've heard me say many times, in the water, in the clouds, and in the earth, because that coding is coding to unlock our abilities, to unlock our connections with nature, to unlock our connections with the divine and the ancestors. But as long as you are not privy to those codes, you will continue to live in an unconscious state. When you are conscious, it takes you to a different place. And that's what code does for you. So graffiti was code, okay? I did a video on the countries that were affected by this code. I think it's interesting that those major superpower countries that put major regulations and laws and statutes in place to control and condition their people had graffiti artists trying to break through that barrier, trying to knock down those walls, okay? Countries in Europe, Oceania, North America, South America, major cities, okay? And then the way the accidents were happening, spiritual context, collision, electrical shock. Electrical shock and collisions. When you picture that, what does that do to you spiritually? It's an interruption. It's a sudden disruption, right? It's putting an end to something. It's almost like sacrificing, if you will. So I need you all to think about, how does that hit you? What does it make you think of when I talk about the collision? Right? Taking a leap of faith, jumping, being willing to be hit by something, or risk being hit by something, or shocked, electrocuted, right? Because we know when you're electrocuted, that's like a jolt of energy, right? That's energy that overpowers and overtakes. So just think about that. That was a common theme throughout. Some people survived that shock and other people did not, right? What made those other people survive it and other people not? We know probably was the voltage, the location, the weight, the body type, right? Would also help people understand what that was about. The collision now, that's a whole nother thing. That was another thing for me because they kept describing it like the people were colliding into the vehicles. And are we imagining that the people were this strong that they could overtake a train? Did they have superpowers? Or are we saying that, are we not acknowledging that that machinery was mowing down people? That machinery was put in place not to stop for anything or anyone, right? So we'll move on from that to who was dying, right? It was mostly males. I was clear that it was mostly males, right? Because generally when they talk, unless we had some of those groups might have consisted of females, but that wasn't stated. From the description of, people climbing and doing this and doing that, that's not really something that they accredit to females, although we are quite capable. Graffiti became more of a thing that the males did, right? There were a few females that would go through lengths to climb and go in train stations and all this kind of stuff, but generally that was related to the males. There were very few females that were involved in that, at least that I knew of or even heard of. And there are none recorded as being female here. Everything is just generally the age. And a few names that we did get, those were males. So I wanted to say that these males were soldiers. They were like soldiers going on the front line to risk their lives to get this message out, to share these colors. Because let's talk about the colors, right? We didn't even talk about that. The colors that they use for their expression could incite people, right? Could get people's attention, could maybe activate something in you that would make you aware. I want y'all to check out all the graffiti artists that you've heard at and look at what colors they use most of the time. Because once again, I can bet you anything that those colors were activating your crown chakra, your third eye, your throat chakra, your heart chakra, your sacral, and your root chakra, right? And those colors, in case y'all are not familiar, are purple, blue, light blue, green, orange, red. Am I missing a color, y'all? Red, yellow. Red, orange, yellow, because we got the solar plexus where the wisdom comes from. Yeah, the colors would be a big thing as well. We talked about the soldiers. Let's move on to other things that were used to keep them in place. Ropes. Ropes can be used to secure, and ropes can also be used to kill. We know about the lynchings in the U.S. and I'm sure other places. So rope was a common thing to be looked at as well, right? I don't know about anything. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking about rope. Then I got to talk about, I think as a graffiti artist, you probably had rope as something in your bag in case you wanted to climb down somewhere, right? Like you was a proper, what do they call those people? Bungee jumpers and rock climbing. They have ropes to secure them because they're going down buildings and stuff, just like construction workers. But what about the things that they kept in their bags? Like the common theme was knapsacks, right? It seems like all the graffiti artists had knapsacks because that's what they carried their spray paint cans, and the art was with those cans. They could spray the artwork. So you had the spray paint cans. You probably had rags if you had a brushing style. I mostly imagine it was spray paint, though, that was in those bags, and things to remove paint if you needed it. But carrying all of your stuff with you was probably a big thing. And luckily, spray paint cans aren't heavy, right? I imagine they get even lighter as you're using the paint inside of the cans. But that was a big piece, too. Ropes, cans, We talked about the sacrifice. And I thought about water. Water was a part of it as well, because some people were climbing inside of like water storage areas to paint on the walls, dams and stuff like that. Like when the dam was let down, people would be able to see the painting on the wall. But if that water is released without their knowledge, then they were caught in situations where they were at risk. So water, thinking of water as spiritual meaning, we think about carrying messages, right? People do divination with water. Water is all about the ebb and flow of things, and they were trying to flow with the information. So I think that was really cool that water was a part of that. And the notion of tunnels and tracks and trestles and rail yards and trains, these are, I'll leave trains out, but tunnels, tracks, trestles, rails in the train yard, where things are kept secure and closed in and locked. And they were going into places illegally, right? To have access to these things that they wanted to get their messages on, because they thought it might be safer probably to get the trains and have access to as many trains as they wanted, because they were stationary. Those things I think represented trying to contain, right? Trying to secure, control. And these guys were coming in like, y'all trying to control this, but these are our vehicles for us to get our message across. So I thought that was interesting to look at as well. I think it's, like I said, the trains are interesting because trains are the vehicle for messages. They are also things that move with speed. They are metal, they're large. They also are like snakes. Think about it, right? Train has different sort of compartments to it, right? Carriages, or I don't know what you call them, cars that are linked together. And those cars are like a link. And that link is moving through cities, through states, through countries. People from all over are going to see what is on them. So that snake-like movement is carrying that message every place it stops, everywhere it goes. Everyone that enters it is getting that energy. So I think that was interesting. And then last but not least, I was talking about the action of them having to, some people fell on the third rail. Some people jumped from higher heights and they thought they were jumping to safety. Some people were walking in places and were injured by oncoming vehicles. And some people were running, probably running from security or the police, right? Because they were places they weren't allowed to be. But the action of taking a leap, of throwing caution to the wind and saying, hey, I'm willing to die for this. And y'all know the old saying, if you don't stand for something, you're going to fall for anything, right? Yeah. Or those who stand for nothing will fall for anything. And these soldiers stood for something. And that something is now being relayed. It has always been relayed, but we know with the coming of the modern age and replacing old trains and coming out with new ones and cleaning the work off the trains, all this kind of stuff. A lot of those images don't exist unless people got photos, right? So I know they got a graffiti book out there for y'all, and y'all should check it out. And I met some pretty amazing graffiti artists as well. I believe a brother, I'm trying to think of his brother's name. I had him at my art gallery once. I think it was Michael Cologne when I was in Reading, Pennsylvania. And this brother was amazing, and he knew all those crews. So yeah, y'all, check out graffiti. Don't forget the messages. There's so much code in them. I can't wait to go through them and really examine them, because I know that the code is in those messages. And the colors will unlock some things in you. So just by you looking at it and enjoying the artwork and observing, codes will be released for you. So I hope you enjoy this, us running through the spiritual messages. And this same technique that I used by looking at the overall theme of what kept coming up what kept occurring. It's the same thing you can do in your dreams, in your meditations. When you see there's a common theme, start to take down those major topics and really pull them apart and see what they mean to you and how they make you feel. This is how these things made me feel. And I just wanted to share this with you, and I hope it was helpful. Blessings.